If you are new to the channel, we welcome you to our community of truth seekers. We invite you to hit that subscribe button right now and join us as we piece together the fragments left behind at the scene of the investigation. Your subscription directly supports deep, independent research into public records and forensic logs that are often overlooked. As we prepare to untangle these 15 unforgettable cases, we would love to know exactly who is standing watch with us today. Take a brief moment to leave a comment down below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. We begin our structural audit of these legal dossiers, where 15 women crossed lines that can never be uncrossed, executing coordinated plans fueled by calculated intent, manipulation, and cold-blooded evasion. Every detail has been meticulously verified through public records, cell tower location logs, and official court transcripts. Get comfortable, lock your perimeters, and pay close attention. Let us begin. Case 1. Our first file opens on September 16, 2022, in Bayshore, New York. The location is 5th Avenue, a standard residential stretch that, on this particular evening, became the center of a highly unusual surveillance operation. Linver Ortiz-Pon, a 29-year-old asphalt worker, had just completed a grueling series of consecutive double shifts. Exhausted and unable to safely complete his commute, he pulled his red Chevrolet Camaro to the curb, turned off the engine, and fell asleep behind the wheel. He had no criminal record, carried no illicit cargo, and had no personal or professional ties to anyone on that street. He was simply a driver resting in a public space. From a nearby window, 23-year-old Kayla Alvarina observed the unfamiliar vehicle. Alvarina maintained a rigid, highly protective fixation on her property perimeter, viewing any unrecognized vehicle as an immediate territorial threat. Instead of contacting the Suffolk County Police Department or initiating a standard neighborhood inquiry, Alvarina chose to execute an independent tactical response. Rather than acting alone, Alvarina expanded her operational footprint by leveraging a closed network of 5 adolescent associates. Using encrypted messaging applications, she assumed the role of a central coordinator, issuing precise tracking commands to these minors. She instructed the group to establish a visual perimeter around the Camaro, monitor the driver's movements, and wait for him to wake up. When Linver Ortiz-Pon finally started his engine and pulled away from the curb, the minors followed him in their own vehicles under Alvarina's explicit guidance. At a nearby intersection, they intercepted his car, forcing him out at gunpoint. They took control of the victim and his vehicle, transporting him to an isolated church parking lot, where the encounter was finalized with a firearm. The conspiracy collapsed not because of a lack of physical concealment, but because of a massive digital oversight. Immediately following the encounter, Alvarina used her personal mobile phone to access a commercial rideshare application. Digital billing logs later recovered by tech investigators proved a vehicle was dispatched directly to the church parking lot perimeter. Alvarina and her associates used this commercial ride to travel directly back to her residence on 5th Avenue, cementing a digital link between her home and the scene of the incident. Homicide detectives with the Suffolk County Police Department traced the vehicle's telemetry and extracted data from regional cell towers. By cross-referencing this location data with highway gas station security footage and localized residential cameras, investigators systematically identified all 5 minor accomplices. When confronted with the chronological data overlay, the alliance dissolved completely. Every single minor provided consistent, independent statements detailing Alvarina's command structure, confirming that she picked the target, directed the vehicle interception, and managed the post-incident transport log. Suffolk County District Attorney Raymond Tierney presented this technical evidence to the court, detailing how an ordinary citizen lost his life simply for parking on a public street, driven entirely by a defendant who weaponized adolescence to maintain absolute control over her neighborhood boundaries. On March 26, 2026, a Suffolk County jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict against Alvarina for first-degree murder, kidnapping, robbery, and conspiracy. On April 28, 2026, the court handed down a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. At 23 years old, her digital footprints had permanently sealed her legal fate. Case 2. Our second file moves to American Fork, Utah, to analyze a highly calculated domestic conspiracy that unfolded on July 12, 2024. 42-year-old Matthew Rastelli, an independent contractor from California, completed a 600-mile drive through the night. His wife, Catherine, had recently requested marital separation and moved into the residence of her 60-year-old mother, Tracy Grist. The long drive was initiated because Catherine had suddenly contacted Matthew, indicating a desire to salvage their high-conflict marriage and inviting him home. To ensure his seamless arrival, Catherine provided Matthew with the security codes to the gated neighborhood and explicitly instructed him to bypass knocking and walk directly inside the house. Matthew parked his vehicle, left his footwear at the threshold as a sign of respect, and stepped into the residence. Tracy Grist was positioned silently in the kitchen. Rather than greeting her son-in-law, she immediately directed him toward the adjacent living room area. Within 60 seconds of his entry, Grist's son, Kevin Ellis, stepped out from a concealed position, armed with a firearm legally registered to his mother, and fired 7 times. Following the shooting, a critical chronological gap occurred. Emergency dispatch records proved that 8 full minutes elapsed before anyone inside the house dialed 911. During this operational window, a systematic staging of the crime scene took place. Responding officers found a highly specialized, rare knife placed directly into Matthew's non-dominant hand to simulate an active assault. Grist then transmitted a text message to an immediate neighbor stating that an intruder had entered with a blade and her son had been forced to protect the home. The American Fork Police Department and state forensic analysts systematically dismantled this self-defense narrative. The autopsy report delivered a critical blow to the defense. 3 of the entry wounds were located squarely in the victim's back, traveling from back to front, a trajectory completely impossible during a frontal knife charge. Furthermore, the knife handle contained a wealth of genetic material belonging exclusively to the Grist family, while Matthew's DNA was entirely absent from the weapon. Crime scene investigators ran the unique serial identifiers on the rare blade, tracking it back to a niche monthly subscription box service. Financial audits proved Tracy Grist had personally used her credentials to assist a close acquaintance in modifying and canceling that exact subscription order weeks prior. Digital forensics teams subsequently executed a search warrant on Grist's personal hardware. Her internet browsing history revealed a chilling pattern of premeditation. In the days leading up to the ambush, Grist had extensively researched the high-profile Florida case of Donna Adelson, studying the exact legal and tactical methods another family network used to coordinate an action against a daughter's former spouse. Prosecutors established that Grist acted as the central control unit, manipulating her children's protective instincts by fabricating claims of extreme danger. The unified family defense collapsed entirely when Catherine Rastelli accepted a formal plea agreement from the Utah County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. She testified that hours before Matthew arrived, she looked down from the stairs and expressed an explicit desire to stop the plan, to which Grist strictly responded that she did not care and was proceeding regardless. On April 21, 2026, a Utah jury deliberated for 5 hours before returning a unanimous guilty verdict against Tracy Grist for first-degree murder and conspiracy. On June 10, 2026, 4th District Judge Roger Griffin handed down her final sentence, ensuring that the architect of this domestic trap would face permanent structural accountability. Case 3. Our third file moves to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to analyze a highly unusual case of digital isolation and psychological control that culminated on October 29, 2022. Grace Jennings, a 19-year-old woman, had been invited to spend the night as a guest inside a converted residential garage structure located behind a primary property. The space was shared by her former boyfriend, Isaac Apodaca, and his current partner, 20-year-old Kiera McCulley. Jennings entered the structure in complete good faith, entirely unaware of a hidden digital plot that had been unfolding via mobile networks for several consecutive days. When detectives with the Santa Fe Police Department secured the scene and seized all electronic devices within the residence, they uncovered an extensive trail of text messaging data. The logs revealed that Apodaca had systematically exploited McCulley's documented psychological vulnerabilities and history of dissociative mental states. To establish complete behavioral control over his partner, Apodaca manufactured a highly structured, completely fictional covert organization that he named Ghost. Through hundreds of encrypted text logs, Apotica convinced McCulley that she could achieve formal initiation and high-tier advancement within the shadow network under one specific condition. She had to physically eliminate Jennings, whom Apotica framed as a critical operational rival. McCulley never sought external validation or questioned the reality of this digital hierarchy. Police interrogation logs later revealed that she had already been experiencing unvetted internal fantasies regarding violence, which Apotica actively weaponized. The text message timelines showed a constant stream of tactical instruction leading directly into the early morning hours of October 29th. While Jennings slept defenseless inside the structure, McCulley armed herself with a 3-foot metal sword kept on the premises. Under the direct coaching of Apotica's text messages, McCulley executed the directive, deploying extreme force that completely bypassed any opportunity for the victim to establish a defensive posture. Immediately following the event, Apotica initiated an emergency call, attempting to position himself to first responders as an innocent bystander who had simply discovered a completed crime scene. However, digital forensics teams quickly dismantled his narrative. The outgoing and incoming data signatures on his phone proved he was the central architect of the entire plot, managing the timeline and instructing McCulley throughout the final hours. When confronted with this electronic evidence, Apotica offered a weak defense, claiming he was only transmitting messages back in casual correspondence so he could clear his device and rest. This case stands as a stark forensic lesson in the hidden dangers of insular, closed-network grooming, where automated text streams can completely overwrite real-world moral boundaries. In February 2025, Kiera McCulley entered a negotiated guilty plea to second-degree murder, resulting in a sentence of up to 30 years within the New Mexico Corrections Department. Apotica took a different legal path, physically tearing up his signed plea agreement directly in front of the bench. His independent trial remains a high-priority tracking metric on the active judicial calendar for late 2026. Case 4. Our fourth file moves to Jacksonville, Florida, highlighting how an unmanaged healthcare lapse can result in a sudden breakdown of public safety monitoring systems. On July 2, 2025, at 3:48 in the morning, patrol units with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office responded to an emergency call at the Cross Creek apartment complex on the city's west side. Behind a residential stairwell, officers located the body of 41-year-old Waduda Woodley. The physical scene immediately pointed to intense, targeted violence, but the most unusual element was a white sheet of paper resting directly on the victim's chest. Written in bright green highlighter, the note read, "Pedo touches children." Detectives immediately secured the perimeter and executed a search warrant on a nearby apartment belonging to 21-year-old Journey McGrew. As she was being detained by responding officers, McGrew asked a single question: "Is he still alive?" Inside her apartment, forensics teams uncovered an undeniable physical trail. In the bathroom sink sat a standard household claw hammer caked in liquid blood. Scattered across the floor were blood-drenched apparel items and footwear, including pink rubber clogs and a black tank top. On the counter directly beside the sink, investigators located a notebook with loose leaf paper and a green highlighter, both perfectly matching the material and ink profile used to construct the note left on the victim's chest. Digital forensics and behavioral analysts reconstructed the days leading up to the encounter to understand the motive. Investigators discovered that McGrew had known Woodley since she was 8 years old, during a time when he was dating her older sister. McGrew harbored internal, unvetted beliefs that Woodley had groomed and assaulted her during her youth, claims she had never reported to family or law enforcement. A comprehensive criminal database audit conducted by the Florida State Attorney's Office completely refuted the allegations on the note, confirming that Woodley had an absolute clean record with zero history of child exploitation offenses. The true systemic catalyst emerged through her medical and institutional records. McGrew had previously been diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. However, months prior to the incident, an abrupt administrative termination of her health insurance coverage caused a complete cutoff from her mental health monitoring network and prescription pharmaceutical access. Left entirely unmedicated, her condition rapidly deteriorated into severe paranoia, leading her to believe cars were actively tracking her movements. On July 1, 2025, McGrew sent a highly calculated text message to Woodley, claiming she had been experiencing mutual romantic fantasies to lower his guard. When Woodley arrived at the apartment complex under the impression it was a consensual meeting, McGrew waited until his back was turned, striking him repeatedly with the hidden hammer before dragging his body to the public breezeway. She then removed the bathroom sink drain plug to wash the weapon, later hiding the blood-stained component in her bedroom to disrupt the physical evidence collection. This case stands as an educational lesson in the hidden dangers that arise when critical psychiatric support structures collapse within low-income housing perimeters, highlighting the necessity of continuity in social safety tracking. In December 2025, Journey McGrew entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. Her formal sentencing and final disposition hearing concluded before a Florida court on April 30, 2026, delivering legal closure to a scenario born from structural failure. Case 5. Our fifth file moves to Coos Bay, Oregon, to expose how vulnerabilities in family court custody monitoring and financial security frameworks can allow a calculated plot to cross international borders. On August 2, 2021, at 3:15 in the morning, two unidentified men breached the residence of Dr. Craig Jackson, a Navy veteran and practicing physician. Dr. Jackson had recently attempted to rebuild his personal life following a highly contentious, bitter divorce. His new spouse, Amy, awoke to the presence of two figures standing over their bed in the dark. Amy retreated beneath the mattress to seek cover as a physical struggle erupted in the room, followed quickly by gunfire. When the intruders fled and she emerged, she located Dr. Jackson unresponsive in the hallway. He had been targeted first in the lower body, then finalized with a close-range trajectory to the head. The tracking of the perpetrators immediately shifted to the terrain behind the home, which descended down a steep, brushy cliff toward Highway 101. Along this escape route, Coos County Sheriff's deputies located a single discarded latex glove. Forensic technicians extracted a latent touch DNA profile from the material. When investigators executed a search warrant at the residence of Dr. Jackson's ex-wife, Raina Jackson, located 20 miles away, they recovered a discarded shirt in the exterior bushes. The genetic profile from the latex item matched the shirt completely, establishing a direct physical link between her property and the flight path used by the perpetrators. A subsequent financial audit by white-collar crime investigators uncovered a clear economic motive. The former couple's divorce had been financially devastating. In January 2020, Raina had legally lost custody of their daughter, Isabella, and her $5,000 monthly alimony allocation was scheduled to expire in exactly 5 months. Financial database tracking revealed that mere days after the incident, a fraudulent check for $40,000 was drawn directly from Dr. Jackson's Navy Federal Credit Union account and deposited into an unrelated name. Before law enforcement could execute an arrest warrant, Raina exploited gaps in international border tracking, fleeing the country to Guatemala and taking their young daughter, Isabella, with her. She successfully evaded tracking for nearly 2 years. However, on June 14, 2023, intelligence indicators signaled she had boarded a flight returning to the United States. Deputy United States Marshals intercepted her the moment she stepped off the aircraft at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. To delay her identification, she initially provided booking officers at the Clayton County Jail with a false identity, claiming she was a displaced individual from Jonesboro, Georgia. This case serves as a vital lesson in the hidden dangers of high-conflict domestic disputes, highlighting the necessity for immediate border alert systems when custody boundaries are compromised. Following a comprehensive 3-week trial featuring exhaustive DNA and banking logs, a Coos County jury convicted Raina Jackson of second-degree murder on April 24, 2026. The court handed down a mandatory life sentence requiring her to serve a strict 25-year absolute minimum carceral block. The identity of the two hired individuals who navigated the physical scene remains an active investigation file, while Isabella remains permanently insulated from her paternal family network. Case 6. Our sixth file shifts to Herndon, Virginia, exposing how a digital platform and an international cultural exchange program were systematically exploited to construct a lethal trap. On February 24, 2023, at 7:30 in the morning, 39-year-old Joseph Ryan arrived at a residential property, walked through an unlocked front door, and ascended the stairs. He believed he was fulfilling a consensual, prearranged adult fantasy coordinated online through a niche digital networking platform called FetLife. In reality, Ryan was completely unaware that he had been digitally steered into a physical layout designed to terminate his life. The trap was engineered from within the household by the resident husband, Brendan Banfield, and the family's 22-year-old living au pair, Juliana Perez Magalhaes. Digital forensics teams with the Fairfax County Police Department seized the household electronics and uncovered that Banfield and Magalhaes were engaged in an undisclosed relationship. Together, they had manufactured a fraudulent user profile using the real identity of Banfield's wife, Christine Banfield. They used this profile to target, groom, and instruct Ryan to enter the home under precise timing parameters, explicitly commanding him to simulate a violent domestic encounter and to ignore any verbal resistance. On the morning of the event, the co-conspirators executed a coordinated timeline to establish an alibi. Brendan Banfield concealed his wife's personal mobile device and drove to a local McDonald's facility, ensuring his presence was captured on commercial security cameras. Simultaneously, Magalhaes loaded the couple's 4-year-old daughter into a vehicle, positioned herself as a lookout at a nearby cul-de-sac, and transmitted an immediate cellular alert to Brendan the moment Ryan's vehicle entered the residential perimeter. Magalhaes then brought the young child back inside, moving her straight to the basement level. Brendan entered the upper floor, announced himself as a law enforcement official, and fired upon Ryan. He then climbed onto his spouse, Christine, using a sharp instrument to inflict repeated fatal injuries to her neck. When Magalhaes ascended the stairs and observed Ryan still moving on the floor, she produced a secondary weapon and discharged the final round. The pair then initiated an emergency call, reporting the scenario to first responders as a spontaneous home invasion. The fabrications held for 8 months until digital forensics teams reconstructed the underlying cellular data networks. Device location mapping, IP address tracing, and the recovery of hidden application metadata proved the FetLife profile was operated entirely from hardware belonging to the husband and the au pair. This case delivers an educational lesson regarding the hidden dangers of unverified digital communication, highlighting how online platforms can be manipulated to compromise domestic perimeters without any physical indicators of risk. In September 2024, facing capital charges and permanent incarceration, Juliana Perez Magalhaes broke her silence, delivering a comprehensive confession to the Fairfax County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. On February 13, 2026, the presiding judge took an extraordinary step, completely rejecting a lenient plea agreement that would have allowed her immediate release. Citing the calculated gravity of the setup, the court imposed a 10-year carceral sentence, the statutory maximum allowed for manslaughter within the Virginia Department of Corrections. Brendan Banfield's independent legal tracking continues to move through the state judicial complex. Case 7. Our 7th file moves to Moorhead, Minnesota, to analyze a profoundly instructive case regarding the critical importance of neighborhood vigilance, reporting protocols, and the dangers of unregulated childcare networks. On March 18, 2024, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call from an apartment complex on Bellesley Boulevard. The caller reported an acute choking emergency involving a 3-year-old child, Easton James Durangic, claiming he had taken a sip of water, coughed violently, and lost consciousness. When paramedics arrived, they located the child completely unresponsive. Easton was rushed across the state line to Sanford Hospital in Fargo, where medical staff pronounced him deceased less than 2 hours later. A subsequent forensic pathology audit by medical examiners immediately invalidated the choking narrative. The autopsy revealed a staggering total of 28 distinct blunt force trauma markers distributed across the child's face and body. More critically, the medical examiner identified the primary cause of the collapse as a severe internal abdominal injury that had completely perforated his bowel 48 hours prior to the emergency call. Toxins had been slowly leaking into his system, triggering an unmanageable infection. The subsequent investigation by the Moorhead Police Department uncovered a multi-layered failure within the local protective perimeter. Easton had been left in the apartment 7 months prior by his biological mother through a completely informal, unrecorded agreement. There was no social services documentation, no licensing, and zero regulatory oversight. When digital forensics teams extracted the text messaging history from the mobile devices of his 21-year-old primary caretaker, Cheyenne Erickson, and her partner, Rosa Garza, they uncovered a deliberate effort to evade detection. The logs proved that both caretakers had watched the child's physical condition actively deteriorate for 2 solid days. He was vomiting, feverish, and experiencing severe respiratory distress. The text threads explicitly confirmed that Erickson and Garza chose to completely withhold medical intervention because they knew hospital staff would instantly see the extensive physical markers on his body and contact law enforcement. The most disturbing systemic breakdown, however, extended beyond the apartment walls. Investigative interviews revealed that over those 7 months, at least 7 different adults had visited the residence, visually observed the severe bruising and trauma markers on the child, and chosen to walk away without making a single report to protective agencies. This case stands as a powerful educational lesson in the hidden dangers of informal childcare networks and the catastrophic reality of the bystander effect. It underscores a vital takeaway for parents and communities. Child safety requires absolute adherence to structured, vetted care providers, clear boundaries, and an unyielding commitment by neighbors to report visible signs of harm immediately. The legal resolution brought firm accountability to the residents. Co-defendant Rosa Garza entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and received a 20-year sentence. On April 7, 2026, Cheyenne Erickson officially withdrew her initial not guilty plea, admitting to second-degree murder. On May 20, 2026, Judge Tammy Merkins sentenced Erickson to 15 years in state prison. Under Minnesota law, she is bound to a 10-year absolute minimum carceral block before she can be considered for supervised release, finalizing a case that forced an entire community to re-examine its collective responsibility toward the vulnerable. Case 8. A specialized housing structure on a quiet residential block in New Rochelle, New York, became the focal point of an extensive multi-agency investigation that forever changed how local social networks monitor high-risk adults. The case centered on 27-year-old Ketta Morton, a trusting individual living with significant developmental and cognitive disabilities. Seeking independence, Ketta entered a third-floor apartment managed by a local acquaintance, Kenya Tilford. Because Ketta functioned outside structured state-sponsored assistance programs, she slipped into an unregulated residential arrangement completely devoid of social services tracking or community oversight. A comprehensive forensic audit of the property and subsequent neighbor interviews revealed that over a 90-day window during the summer of 2023, Tilford completely inverted her role as a trusted point of contact. She systematically isolated Ketta from her extended family, trapping her inside the apartment boundaries and subjecting her to escalating physical restriction. Because of her cognitive vulnerabilities, Ketta depended entirely on Tilford for daily sustenance, lacking the communication tools or mobile access needed to alert local law enforcement or signal for emergency assistance. The concealment ended in late 2023 when Tilford deployed physical restriction methods that resulted in fatal asphyxiation. When detectives with the New Rochelle Police Department processed the scene and initiated a broader behavioral forensic tracking operation, they realized the exploitation extended far beyond a single instance. Investigators successfully located 2 additional surviving individuals who possessed similar cognitive dependencies and had previously managed to escape that exact same apartment perimeter. Financial records and digital timelines prove Tilford operated a calculated pattern of targeting independent adults with intellectual disabilities, utilizing psychological coercion to seize control of their personal resources and legal documentation. This dossier delivers a critical public safety takeaway regarding the hidden dangers faced by neurodivergent individuals within private, unmonitored housing structures. It emphasizes an absolute necessity for families, educational centers, and community advocates to maintain active, unannounced validation checks and structured protective networks, ensuring high-risk adults remain connected even when no obvious institutional red flags are visible. The trial presented the Westchester County Court with weeks of dense forensic pathology data, digital device timelines, and the crucial direct testimony of the surviving individuals. On March 20, 2026, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict against Kenya Tilford on all 18 counts of the grand jury indictment, including murder, unlawful imprisonment, and financial exploitation. On April 23, 2026, Judge George Fufidio finalized the case, handing down a definitive sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, paired with permanent protective mandates to ensure the safety of the surviving witnesses. Case 9. A midnight emergency call originating from a highly isolated stretch of Highway K-42 in rural Monona County, Iowa, exposed the critical vulnerabilities of living in geographically remote zones where law enforcement response windows are inherently delayed. On March 15, 2025, 33-year-old Veronica Klug contacted dispatchers, asserting that she had been forced to deploy a household tool in an act of absolute self-defense against her partner, 38-year-old Justin David Luth. Because the property sat miles from the nearest patrol hub, first responders took critical minutes to navigate the dark rural routes, arriving to find Luth completely unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Klug maintained a rigid narrative to the Monona County Sheriff's Office, claiming that an aggressive confrontation had left her backed into a corner with no viable method of escape. However, because the remote setting lacked third-party witnesses or external surveillance networks, investigators turned entirely to advanced physics and spatial reconstruction. Special agents with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation deployed high-resolution laser scanners to map the exact structural layout of the kitchen. The resulting digital data model completely dismantled the self-defense framework. Forensic analysts tracking the biological fluid distribution patterns proved that the impact occurred while the victim was in a compromised, non-aggressive posture. Furthermore, the internal trajectory analysis of the wounds demonstrated that the tool was swung from an elevated, offensive position rather than a defensive, low-angle retreat. The physical geometry of the space proved that Klug had clear, unblocked paths to exit the room entirely, completely invalidating the claim that she was physically trapped. This case delivers a profound educational takeaway regarding intimate partner dynamics in isolated rural areas, where the lack of immediate proximity to emergency services can cause domestic arguments to escalate rapidly. It underscores the vital importance for rural communities to establish distinct safety boundaries, early behavioral intervention programs, and accessible support networks that do not rely solely on real-time emergency response. The legal proceedings focused heavily on this spatial mapping data, presenting the jury with undeniable physical science over conflicting emotional testimonies. In March 2026, a Monona County jury rejected the absolute acquittal sought by the defense, while also steering away from first-degree premeditation, returning a verdict of second-degree murder. On May 15, 2026, the court finalized the tracking on this file. Klug received a 50-year carceral sentence carrying a strict mandatory 35-year parole restriction, ensuring long-term institutional accountability for a scenario exposed by forensic physics. Case 10. A public parking facility on North Macy Street in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, became the scene of a rapid daytime escalation that exposed the dangerous intersection of street-level pharmaceutical networks and adolescent opportunism. On February 13, 2024, 26-year-old Ashley and Chow arrived at the location to conduct an illicit transaction involving 57 prescription opioid units. Waiting at the perimeter were 18-year-old Annika Trudel and her co-conspirator, Dawson Miller. The duo had no intention of purchasing the pharmaceutical units. Instead, they had coordinated a swift, unweaponized robbery to seize the contraband without financial exchange. The encounter tracking logs show the plan fell apart within seconds of physical contact. As Chow sat in the driver's seat, Trudel lunged forward, reaching completely through the open driver's side window to wrestle control of the items. Desperate to break free from the containment, Chow depressed the accelerator. A witness positioned in an adjacent commercial building provided detailed visual statements to responding units, describing the vehicle abruptly lurching forward while Trudel was still physically entangled with the window frame. The Fond du Lac Police Department utilized advanced vehicle telematics and onboard computer diagnostics to reconstruct the vehicle's final flight path. The data proved that the sudden acceleration caused Chow to lose absolute control of the steering mechanics. The vehicle careened out of the parking perimeter and struck a utility pole at high velocity. When emergency responders breached the smoking wreckage, they located Chow unresponsive from the severe impact forces. Looking into the rear passenger compartment, officers discovered an incredible operational detail. Chow's 3-year-old child was buckled into a safety seat, physically uninjured but completely exposed to the entire event. Detective Nick Hahn spearheaded the subsequent interrogation strategy, confronting Trudel and Miller with the electronic vehicle telemetry and third-party witness logs. Under the pressure of the recorded data, Detective Hahn secured comprehensive video admissions detailing how a low-tier street robbery was actively planned and executed. This dossier highlights a critical systemic breakdown regarding active drug-seeking minors, serving as an educational lesson for parents, schools, and community leaders on the necessity of early behavioral intervention and sharp boundaries to prevent youth from slipping into illicit parallel economies. Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney drove the prosecution through the state judicial system, structuring a severe multi-count accountability framework. Miller received a 30-year carceral term for his role in the felony murder layout. Trudel chose to bypass a full trial, entering a formal no-contest plea to charges of first-degree reckless homicide and armed robbery. On May 21, 2026, the court handed down its final determination, sentencing Trudel to 35 years in state prison, to be followed by 20 years of strict extended community supervision. Case 11, an isolated residential property on Thunder Road in Perry, Maine, became the starting point for a complex legal battle that would ultimately reshape the boundaries of acceptable forensic science across the entire state. On April 21, 2022, Samuel Neptune arrived at his sister's home, stepping into a heavily disrupted interior. Inside, he located the unresponsive body of 43-year-old Kim Neptune. A subsequent autopsy report from state medical examiners detailed an intense encounter involving 484 individual physical trauma markers inflicted by a sharp household tool. Crucially, the pathology team determined that an anterior vascular injury caused the victim to lose total consciousness within 2 minutes, establishing a precise chronological window for the event. The Washington County Sheriff's Office immediately launched an extensive regional tracking operation. Investigators secured video surveillance logs from a nearby commercial retail store captured on the night of the incident. The footage displayed a figure wearing a distinct, full-face mask navigating the area near the residence. Simultaneously, financial database tracking uncovered an immediate, unauthorized withdrawal of $700 from the victim's personal bank accounts, linking the financial theft directly to the timeline of the encounter. When detectives detained 41-year-old Kay Brackett, they lacked direct eyewitnesses or definitive genetic material linking her to the interior of the home. To bridge this evidentiary gap, the prosecution introduced a highly specialized expert, a forensic podiatrist. This specialist analyzed footwear impressions left on the internal wooden staircase of the Thunder Road home. By evaluating the specific wear patterns and weight distribution markers within the prints, the expert confidently testified that Brackett's unique gait matched the physical tracks at the scene, securing a conviction and a 55-year prison sentence in late 2023. However, this case stands as a profound systemic lesson in the hidden dangers of introducing unverified, unscientific methodologies into the judicial process. True child protection, family security, and public safety rely entirely on investigative integrity. When courts validate unreliable tracking methods, the true mechanics of a crime remain obscured, preventing genuine community resolution. The structural breakdown in the state's scientific evidence led to a historic appellate challenge. On February 5, 2026, the Maine Supreme Judicial Court issued a unanimous, exhaustive 42-page judicial reversal that completely dismantled the original conviction. The High Court ruled that forensic podiatry failed to meet the rigorous scientific standards required for admissibility in a capital trial, labeling the footprint comparison methodology inherently unreliable. Furthermore, the justices sharply criticized the prosecution's loose characterization of the track evidence to the jury. With the initial conviction legally invalidated, the state Supreme Court ordered a total structural trial reset, placing the case back at the absolute beginning of the legal process. Case 12, an industrial perimeter line cutting through Schenectady, New York, became the focal point of a systemic multi-agency investigation that exposed the catastrophic intersection of severe substance abuse and unmonitored security boundaries. On March 9, 2024, following an intense domestic dispute, 24-year-old Persia Nelson abruptly exited a local residence. She stepped out into freezing winter conditions completely unequipped for the weather, carrying her 10-month-old infant daughter, Halo Brandon. She possessed no winter apparel for the child, no stroller, and no safety supplies, drifting into a state of extreme geographic disorientation. Instead of navigating toward a safe shelter or residential zone, Nelson wandered directly into a dense, frozen wooded swamp area bordering the high-security General Electric industrial campus. Driven by an unmanaged internal crisis, she scaled a security fence, breaching the perimeter of the heavily fortified facility. Automated thermal tracking logs and closed-circuit security cameras later reviewed by investigators showed her navigating deep into the industrial property, passing massive operational structures. As she moved through an unlit utility section, Nelson dropped the 10-month-old infant directly into a subterranean concrete drainage pipe before continuing onward alone. Hours later, plant security personnel located Nelson sleeping inside a climate-controlled infrastructure utility shed on the far side of the campus. When questioned about the location of her child, she provided disoriented, conflicting statements, prompting an immediate mobilization of the Schenectady Police Department and regional search teams. For nearly 12 hours, rescue personnel navigated the vast industrial grid. At 12:30 in the afternoon on March 10th, search teams finally located the infant inside the dark utility pipe, where prolonged exposure to the freezing winter environment had proven completely unmanageable for the child's system. This dossier delivers a critical public safety lesson regarding the hidden dangers of unmonitored industrial boundaries bordering residential areas, highlighting how easily a vulnerable child can be lost when public perimeters lack active, real-time intervention systems. It underscores the vital necessity for industrial facilities to synchronize their physical security barriers with active emergency response triggers when an unauthorized breach occurs. The state judicial complex pursued a framework of absolute accountability, presenting the court with undeniable time-stamped video evidence and thermal tracking maps. On October 16, 2025, a New York jury completely rejected arguments of accidental disorientation, convicting Nelson of second-degree depraved indifference murder. On February 2, 2026, Judge Matthew Sipniewski finalized the tracking on this file, applying the absolute statutory maximum sentence of 25 years to life in a state maximum security infrastructure facility. Case 13. A chaotic parking lot outside a crowded commercial venue in Alexandria, Louisiana, became the focus of an extensive ballistic and forensic examination that set a new precedent for firearm accountability in the region. On June 5, 2021, a packed crowd gathered at a local establishment on 3rd Street to watch a live musical performance by artist Leon Chavis. During the high-energy event, an accidental physical collision occurred on the dance floor, triggering a rapid verbal dispute between patrons. Instead of being successfully de-escalated by staff or contained by the venue's entry gate security, the hostility intensified and spilled out into the adjacent public parking lot. Amidst the growing confrontation, 28-year-old Kendra Walker interjected herself into the dispute, pulling a concealed firearm from her apparel. Standing nearby was 26-year-old Makelia Rasha Bush Williams, who, along with witnesses Shunvika Bush Williams and Yundria Carter, was actively attempting to defuse the situation by pulling her family members away from the active fight. Walker raised the weapon and discharged a single round, striking Williams at close range before fleeing the commercial perimeter. During the subsequent legal proceedings, the defense mounted a high-risk strategy, asserting that the firearm had suffered a spontaneous mechanical failure and discharged accidentally as Walker was waving it to clear space. To resolve this claim, the state introduced exhaustive testimony from renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Christopher Tape. Dr. Tape presented a precise anatomical and ballistic trajectory reconstruction to the court. By mapping the entry angle and analyzing the internal mechanics of the recovered weapon, Dr. Tape systematically proved that the firearm's internal safety features functioned perfectly. The ballistic evidence conclusively demonstrated that the weapon could not have fired due to a drop, a jar, or a mechanical slip. It required deliberate manual trigger depression under significant physical force. This case delivers a critical public safety lesson regarding the hidden dangers of unvetted security protocols at high-capacity commercial events. It underscores a vital takeaway for venue owners and local municipalities. Preventing public tragedies requires absolute, uncompromising screening at all access perimeters to ensure weapons can never breach a shared community space. The Alexandria Police Department's technical evidence and Dr. Tape's forensic clarity secured a total victory for the prosecution. In December 2025, a Louisiana jury found Walker guilty of second-degree murder. On February 1, 2026, the presiding judge applied the state's mandatory statutory penalty, sentencing Walker to life imprisonment at hard labor without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. Seeking to overturn the verdict, Walker's legal team filed an expedited challenge, but on April 23, 2026, the Louisiana Third Circuit Court of Appeal officially denied the petition, cementing her permanent separation from the community. Case 14. An unassuming residential property on French Place in El Paso, Texas, became the focal point of a highly sophisticated ballistic reconstruction that completely dismantled a carefully staged domestic narrative. On December 27, 2023, patrol units with the El Paso Police Department arrived at the Lower Valley home to find 43-year-old Jose Luis Avalos Reyes deceased on the floor. Standing inside the residence was his partner, 43-year-old Luz Elena Martinez, who immediately initiated a self-defense framework, claiming she had been forced to deploy a firearm to protect herself from an imminent physical assault. Because the household had an absolute clean record with zero history of prior domestic disturbance calls or law enforcement intervention, detectives with the Crimes Against Persons Unit relied entirely on physical science to verify her claims. Forensic technicians conducted an exhaustive internal ballistic trajectory reconstruction and a comprehensive biological fluid spatter audit of the room. The scientific data delivered a definitive blow to the defense. The angle of the entry wounds proved the projectiles traveled along a downward path that was completely inconsistent with a standard upright defensive stance. Furthermore, the precise positioning of the recovered weapon and the distribution of blood spatter proved that Reyes was caught entirely off guard, targeted during a surprise ambush while in a non-aggressive, compromised position. As investigators unraveled the scene, the true behavioral motive emerged. Digital forensics teams extracted communications proving that Martinez had recently discovered evidence of an extramarital relationship. Driven by this discovery, she meticulously planned a retaliatory action within the home, utilizing the domestic setting to lower the victim's guard before executing the plot. Realizing the forensic evidence was closing in, Martinez attempted to evade tracking, but her flight was cut short on March 11, 2024, when the United States Marshal Service located and executed a felony arrest warrant. This case stands as a powerful public safety lesson regarding the hidden nature of intimate partner violence, demonstrating how severe personal conflicts can escalate to extreme levels behind closed doors without any prior external indicators. It underscores a vital takeaway for communities on the necessity of providing accessible, confidential mediation and behavioral health resources to safely resolve relational fractures before they cross a line of no return. The overwhelming clarity of the spatial and ballistic evidence left the defense with no viable path to acquittal at trial. In May 2026, Luz Elena Martinez entered a formal guilty plea to murder charges before a Texas state court. The presiding judge finalized the tracking on this file by handing down a definitive 20-year carceral sentence within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, closing the book on a case solved by forensic physics. Case 15. A heavily fortified housing sector inside the Fort Riley military installation in Kansas became the focal point of a major federal investigation that highlighted the unique legal and psychological complexities of domestic tracking within military boundaries. On February 19, 2024, an intense, escalating verbal dispute erupted inside an on-base residential unit between Specialist Greg Skay and his 32-year-old wife, Margaret Skay. The argument rapidly breached a point of no return when Margaret produced a personal firearm, raised the weapon, and discharged a single projectile at close range directly into her husband's face, causing instantaneous, fatal trauma. Because the incident occurred entirely on active military property, jurisdictional control immediately shifted away from local state authorities to the United States Army Criminal Investigation Division, known as CID. Federal agents secured the perimeter and executed a comprehensive technical sweep of the home, extracting digital device logs and communication histories to map out the hours leading up to the event. While the ballistic evidence left no doubt about the physical mechanics of the shooting, The defense attempted to construct a narrative of accidental discharge during a chaotic, mutual physical struggle. The federal prosecution completely dismantled this defense framework by introducing an invaluable, heartbreaking layer of direct evidence. Present inside the room throughout the entire confrontation was the couple's 9-year-old daughter, Sedona Skay. Specialized juvenile forensic interviewers meticulously secured structured, non-coerced video statements from the child. Sedona provided a precise, unwavering chronological account of the incident, testifying that her father was in a stationary, non-threatening posture when her mother deliberately aimed and deployed the weapon. This direct eyewitness testimony transformed the case, providing the federal court with undeniable clarity regarding the intentional nature of the act. This final dossier delivers a profound public safety lesson regarding the hidden patterns of domestic escalation within military communities, where unique environmental pressures can intersect with the immediate availability of firearms. It underscores a vital takeaway for defense infrastructure and community networks. Safeguarding juvenile dependence requires active on-base behavioral support, clear reporting channels, and immediate intervention structures that can safely de-escalate high-conflict households before children are forced to witness irreversible actions. The combination of advanced forensic tracking logs and the child's powerful testimony left the defense with zero room for maneuver before the bench. On February 14, 2025, a federal jury returned a unanimous verdict, finding Margaret Skay guilty of assault resulting in death and the deployment of a firearm during a violent offense. The federal judiciary finalized the tracking on this final dossier by handing down a severe 293-month carceral term, ensuring her long-term placement within the Federal Bureau of Prison System and concluding our systematic forensic audit of 15 cases where the lines of protection were permanently broken. 15 cases. 15 distinct scenarios where established legal, social, and personal boundaries were completely obliterated. From the exploitation of digital networks and the weaponization of minor peers to the silent failures of neighborhood reporting silos, the evidence leaves us with one unmistakable conclusion. Safety is not a passive state. True prevention requires absolute vigilance, structured safety education, and the courage to voice concerns when we witness the early markers of vulnerability or systemic breakdowns. These case files serve as an enduring reminder that while technology logs our final actions with absolute mathematical precision, the responsibility to protect the vulnerable rests entirely with us. Thank you for standing watch with us today on the invisible evidence. Please use the comments section below to share your perspectives on how communities can better coordinate to bridge these tracking gaps and prevent these structural breakdowns before they manifest. Maintain awareness, secure your perimeters, and we will see you in our next investigative dossier.